story that we broke way before anyone else in 2021. And today it has merely been resuscitated by the New York Times, the Bible of the so-called upholders of democracy in India. And the story has left those very so-called defenders of democracy in India deeply embarrassed. Because this is a story of how Chinese funding came into at least one online portal in India. A portal that claimed to give news, but was actually just a front for Chinese propaganda. As you would have guessed, we are talking about NewsClick. In its August 5 story titled "A Global Web of Chinese Propaganda Leads to a US Tech Mogul," here is what New York Times has said, and I quote, "In New Delhi, corporate filings show that Mr. Singham's network financed a news site, that's NewsClick, that has sprinkled its coverage with Chinese government talking points. The Singham mentioned in this piece is Neville Roy Singham, an American businessman who sits in Shanghai and through non-profit groups and shell companies finances Chinese propaganda worldwide. The Times says that it has tracked hundreds of millions of groups, or rather hundreds and millions of dollars to groups linked to Mr. Singham that mix progressive advocacy with Chinese government talking points. It further says the line between Mr. Singham and Chinese government is so blurry that he shares office space with a company whose goal is to educate foreigners about the miracles being made in China. Singham and his allies are on the front line of what Communist Party officials call a smokeless war. New York Times says this, a smokeless war, and Neville Roy Singham and his collaborators are at the front line of the CCP's smokeless war. My friends, it is this Neville Roy Singham who pumped 38 crores into NewsClick. The portal, when it was searched, was hailed by many as the vanguard of journalism in India, but was taking 38 crores from a man waging smokeless war on China's adversary. Today, the New York Times has woken up to Singham's propaganda peddling through Indian collaborators, but we told you about it on the 9th of February 2021. It's on that day that the parent company of NewsClick, that is PPK NewsClick Studio Private Limited, and its promoter Prabir Porkayast were both searched by the ED. This search went on for 5 days, and the agency said the motive was to collect information to probe money laundering charges against NewsClick and Prabir Porkayast. But at the time that these searches were going on, here's what they were called: an attempt to silence and intimidate, to subjugate, to suppress, to stifle, and nothing more than a fake raid to deliberately attack free press. These criticisms of the raid and staunch defense of NewsClick came not from the company, but from members of the Congress, of the TMC, of the CPM, of Indian mainstream political parties, who said that this is nothing more than a Modi government-sponsored witch hunt against real journalists and those who are speaking truth to power. That's why today, when there has been a reiteration of the real nature of NewsClick's operations, their funding, their backing, their intent, today the BJP and the government put these same defenders of NewsClick in the dock.
हमने 2021 में NewsClick के बारे में खुलासा किया कि कैसे विदेशी हाथ भारत के खिलाफ है, कैसे विदेशी प्रोपेगेंडा भारत के खिलाफ है, और ये एंटी इंडिया ब्रेक इंडिया कैंपेन में कांग्रेस और विपक्षी दल भी उनके समर्थन में जुड़कर सामने आए। फंडिंग तो कर रहे थे NewsClick को चाइनीज कंपनियां नेविल रॉय सिंघम के माध्यम से, लेकिन जो इनके सेल्समैन थे हमारे हिंदुस्तान के कुछ लोग हो गए थे। जब इनके खिलाफ कार्रवाई हुई तो उनके पक्ष में आकर खड़े हो गए।
I think this kind of politics is absurd. No one in any of our political parties can be considered to be anti-Indian. We have a different view of how India should progress and what India needs in terms of its future as a democracy. We have been critical of this government for not being tough enough on China after they killed 20 of our soldiers in Galwan. So it makes no sense to make such a charge.
So the very simple questions now are, what was the point in shielding those who are clearly carrying out paid Chinese propaganda? Why are some Indians giving cover fire to Chinese propagandists? And will all of those who fulminated in 2021 still call the ED action against NewsClick a witch hunt and an attack on free speech? And that's the question I want to take across to Sanju Verma, National Spokesperson of the BJP, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow at IPCS, Professor Manojit Mandal, Political Analyst, Sebastian Paul, former Member of Parliament and Spokesperson of the CPIM. And that's the first question to you, Roahan Mitra, Political Analyst. Is it still a witch hunt?
Padmaja, I was seeing Amit Malviya's tweet, which we used today. Who picked up on, who are the people who have come up in favor of NewsClick? Is it the Congress party?
Yes, it is.
I don't see any statement from the Congress party. It was the Editors Guild of India. Let me
quote to you.
It was the Editors Guild of India, Padmaja.
No, it is not.
It is the editors. No, let me finish. I'm picking on Amit Malviya's news break today in the morning.
It's okay. I don't have to follow what Amit Malviya is saying. You're asking me who made statements. Let me quote to you who made statements. Here are the people.
You're talking about the BJP. You're defending you're bringing out the BJP's propaganda out here.
I'm not.
You're talking about
Anurag
a very specific Thakur, question. Who's caught on perjury on the Supreme Court.
Roahan Mitra,
you have a
it
man
is very
like
easy.
Dubey,
Roahan Mitra,
who has a fake
it is
degree,
very
which
easy.
Is this thing.
The moment somebody starts giving facts and say,
Padmaja.
oh, this is BJP propaganda. I literally just told you I don't have to parrot what Amit Malviya is saying. I have got my own list. So I will tell you what comments came from the Congress.
Right? I am
to just quote a few. Karti Chidambaram, Member of Parliament of the Congress. How many will this BJP regime try to silence and intimidate via its favorite agency, the Directorate of ED? Where is the collective outrage among the media fraternity? Randeep Singh Surjewala, Congress. Subjugate, suppress and stifle is the only mantra of the Modi government as proved by the ED raids on NewsClick. Modi government wants to tell the media, bol kyun ki lab kyun azad hain tere? This is just a sampling of what the Congress party said. Do you still think it's a witch hunt?
But Padmaja, I am just telling you today, I'm telling you today, the BJP needs to finalize. Just because Mr. Rahul Gandhi was back in Parliament, the whole opposition was in a good place today. The BJP needed a story. So they had to pick on New York Times out of all their, all the articles out there. They picked on New York Times, the ones which
Roahan Mitra,
they are the ones who bash New York Times.
My question to you is very simple.
They're happy.
In 2021,
I have a question for the BJP.
In 2021, when the searches happened, at that time it was said, this is Modi Shah muzzling the voice of dissent of the only people who dare to speak against them. Everyone else is Godi media. The defenders of journalism in this country is NewsClick.
Said that, Padmaja.
They have
literally said that. India has said that.
Literally
it's not
said that.
Congress alone. And
so why did the Congress say
is a member of that Editors Guild.
Why are you going back to Editors Guild? I quoted to you Mr. Chidambaram. I quoted to you Mr. Surjewala.
Yeah.
Do you think that they jumped the gun in trying to shield somebody who was paying, who was getting money from China?
Stands for. You have Mr. Praful Patel and Mr. Praful Patel, who is accused by the ED. Today he is with the BJP. What status does the ED have in the for the people of India?
But here it is not even the ED. Here it is not even about the ED. Today, it is independent emails, communications, which you are ignoring, and your favorite New York Times, which the last I heard has been quoted thrice by the Congress party to attack the Modi government. When the New York Times prints a picture of, funeral pyres lit up during COVID, they are the word of God. Frankly, I don't think anyone needs to pay attention because we had done this story way before New York Times. But since today New York Times has also woken up.
The matter is in court. Let the ED prove the cases. No, let the ED prove the case against NewsClick. We are not defending NewsClick if they've taken money from China for their propaganda. We are against China. We are the ones who are asking why is the the trade deficit with China at 100 billion? Why is the the Indian army not taking a progressive step against the Chinese? We are against China and we've been against China. Rahul Gandhi has been on record against China.
Okay.
And we've heard what
again
he has said about
you
the
are
Chinese.
sidestepping. You are sidestepping the basic question I am asking. We can go in all directions and we can say, what about Doklam and what about Galwan and what about this? My simple question to you is, NewsClick takes money from China via Neville Roy Singham. This is what ED said in 2021. Okay. When the ED said this in 2021, you said, ED, you are talking rubbish, you are muzzling the voice of dissent. Now what do you have to say?
Okay. No, I'm telling you, if they've taken money from China and if the money is being used against India, please take action against them.
So you agree that the searches on
systematic corruption against the opposition.
You agree that the searches against NewsClick were justified?
I am saying the Chinese, we are against the Chinese. There is no favoritism towards the Chinese.
So
the
there's
Chinese
a fairly easy question
the
to
PM
answer.
Care. Can we have the details of the PM Care? No, please
so you can have all the details of PM Care. It is available
companies.
Online.
Where's that money
But again, we are going off on a
tangent.
tangent.
Why are we not talking about that?
My simple question
why
to you
are we
is...
not talking about that?
My simple... Because the debate right now is about NewsClick.
PM Care fund.
It's like saying, why... As the debate is on NewsClick, why aren't you talking about Quebec's foreign policy? Because I'm not here to discuss it. I'm here to discuss a very specific topic.
We are not defending NewsClick here.
Okay, Sanju Verma, nobody is defending NewsClick, least of all the Congress. The Congress is not defending NewsClick. Sanju Verma.
Okay. I hope I will get my 2 or 3 minutes. For the last 8 minutes, I've been listening to this gentleman and he's made very little sense. I will just quote what Anurag Thakur said, because I think he made a very pertinent point and put it so succinctly. China funds Neville Roy Singham. He has a direct connection with the Chinese propaganda arm. Congress, China and NewsClick are part of an umbilical cord. In Rahul Gandhi's Nakli Mohabbat ki Dukaan, Chinese goods can be seen clearly. His love for China can be seen. They were running an anti-India agenda. They, as in NewsClick, along with the entire Congress-led cabal. And I will just quickly put forth some points. This entire narrative that the BJP has failed to counter the Chinese, because that is the narrative that has been running in the last few hours from the Congress propaganda handles. So let me tell you that in February 2021, for the first time in the longest time, India, thanks to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, forced the Chinese to voluntarily disengage post Galwan to figure 8, and India pushed back to figure 3. Point number 2, each time you tell us, and Rahul Gandhi, even when he recently went to Cambridge, he kept mouthing one lie after another, saying 2,000 kilometers, have been taken in by China. They've encroached on Indian territory. So let me just tell you what the MP of BJP from Ladakh said to Rahul Gandhi.
Okay, can we limit ourselves to NewsClick, please? This is not about border infrastructure. Limit ourselves to NewsClick, please. Yes.
Okay, fine. Now, if we have to limit ourselves to NewsClick, I just want to say one thing to you, Padmaja. This is not about NewsClick alone. This is a pattern. I remember that when a couple of years back, over 14,000 licenses of NGOs who failed to comply with FCRA norms, when these licenses were cancelled by the Modi government in September 2015, the entire Congress-led ecosystem said, dissent is being muzzled. I remember when Greenpeace was booked for falsification of data and for money laundering, everybody said dissent is being muzzled. I remember when, Akar Ahmed Patel's Amnesty International India was booked for falsification of data and money laundering. They said, oh, the Modi government is scared because Akar Patel speaks truth to power, which is absolutely not the case. He writes gibberish. And most importantly, as you very rightly said, when the New York Times bashed the Modi government at the peak of COVID second wave, when the New York Times bashed the Modi government during the farm protests, when the New York Times bashed the Modi government with respect to migrant workers, when the New York Times bashed the Modi government with respect to inflation, everybody, including Rahul Gandhi and his acolytes, said, Sab Chandra see, New York Times is the beacon of truth.
Okay.
But today, that same New York Times has actually done a turncoat and has questioned the links between Chinese Communist Party, NewsClick, Rahul Gandhi and this entire Congress ecosystem. Suddenly Congress is rattled, Congress darbaris and Congress acolytes don't know where to hide. They are caught between a rock and a hard place.
Okay, let's take the opening comments from Sebastian Paul. Then I want to bring an exclusive news break. I want to actually quote to you something, sir, that New York Times said today, the only part which I actually found quite interesting. It says, Neville Roy Singham and his allies are on the front line of what Communist Party officials call a smokeless war. The goal is to disguise propaganda as independent content. Quite beautifully sums up what some news portals seem to be doing here. Disguise propaganda as independent content to carry out a smokeless war. Yet, when they were searched, here is the statement put up by the CPM as a party. You said that yet another attack on independent media. The CPM demands the end of vindictive action. Yet another leader of CPM said, the attack on NewsClick by Modi Shah through its agencies, the ED and the CBI, shows that they are rattled by anyone who speaks the truth. Do you think that you misjudged what is actually smokeless war as great journalism?
No, at the outset, I have to make a clarification that I am not the official spokesperson for the Communist Party or the CPM, although I am with the party. I am a former MP belonging to the CPM group. Anyway, this is a matter of utmost importance. The CPM has always taken a position in favor of the media or in favor of freedom of expression when there is a confrontation with the government by use of using ED or any other agency.
But sir, this is not confrontation. This is not about the government. This is about a propaganda website practically waging smokeless war on the country, not the government, not the Bharatiya Janata Party, not Mr. Narendra Modi. This is smokeless war on India.
Yes, I fully admit that now the situation has changed. Since 2021, when we heard first about this news, now the situation has changed to the confirmation made by the New York Times.
So
New York Times is not my Bible, but it is a respectable and reliable newspaper.
So when you said that the Enforcement Directorate said we have got evidence against agencies like NewsClick, you said this doesn't seem right because obviously they must be lying. But New York Times has said that they are essentially propagandists for China. Now you believe that NewsClick is indeed a propaganda outlet.
No, the revelation or confirmation of the New York Times has not changed our position. We are not believing New York Times or any other agency. Now a serious revelation has come. It is a confirmation has come, which the authorities in India, the law enforcement authorities in India cannot ignore. And in the present circumstances, the inquiry should go on because we are always against the entry of foreign money in the
I'm very glad, sir, that you have taken a very wise and nuanced position on this. But I am also quite interested to see that you were at pains to underline you're not the official spokesperson of the CPM, even though you're a former MP, while mouthing this admission. Now, let me show you two very important pieces of evidence. Everyone talks about, oh, you know, ED is talking through its hat, ED doesn't know, they're just saying these things because these people are speaking truth to power, Modi Shah is very scared. Let's show you what were the emails being exchanged. We have got with us emails which were sent between Neville Roy Singham and Prabir Purkayasth in the course of the year 2020. Now, this, remember, is in the middle of COVID. The entire world knew that the outbreak originated in Wuhan. Now it is being said not just by Chinese whistleblowers, but even American scientists, doctors are forced to admit that Wuhan was responsible, China was responsible for the outbreak. What happened in 2020 when Neville Roy Singham emailed journalist Prabir Purkhayast. This email came on the 30th of March 2020 at 12:41 p.m. It came from Neville Roy Singham, like I said, to Prabir Purkhayast. There are many other people who are also marked on it, but these are the two people of principal interest. Mr. Singham is actually introducing Prabir Purkhayast and two more Indian content creators to somebody called Zoo. He says, please meet the following international friends who work together on creating information for the people. Creating information for the people. He goes on to name three people. The first one is Prabir Purkhayast. The second is Srijana, who is an activist economist based in Delhi. Then there is Prashant, journalist and editor, also based in Delhi. Zoo, we are being told now, works for China Daily, which is the newspaper owned by the CCP. So the mouthpiece of the Chinese government is being introduced, somebody who used to work for the mouthpiece is being introduced to three Indian journalists. Then the email goes on to say, why are these introductions being made between Zoo and three people who create information for people? The articles that they wanted to be put out. The first one says, we are working on a three-part series of articles on China and the handling of coronavirus. Let's go to that part. It says, we are working together. I want to just zoom in here. If you could just zoom into this part. It says here, we are working together on a three-part series of articles on China and the handling of the coronavirus. So here, there is an attempt to try and whitewash what China's role, what China's behavior in the course of the COVID outbreak was. Three-part series is being done for it. The second article is going to discuss how China learned quickly while handling the crisis. In 2020, they are out to write three-part articles on how quickly China learned after the outbreak. Then it says, can we also have a timeline of number of tests and number of people who tested positive? This will give us a sense China identified the virus genetic sequence, developed kits, ran their production and testing. Note this part. Note this part where they say that how quickly China identified the virus genetic sequence, developed the kits and ramped up their production and testing, a contrast to countries like US and India. A contrast to countries like US and India. So they are saying, please write these articles which will basically create information for people about how stellar a job China was doing as contrasted to countries like US and India. What do you have to make of this excellent piece of journalism, Abhijit Mitra?
Well, you see, Padmaja, thank you for having me on, but I've never had much respect for NewsClick, nor have I had any respect for the New York Times. There's zero integrity in their entire editorial board. Let's get that out of the way first. Second, I think anybody who's met Prabir will tell you that he's a very naive, innocent, sweet, grown man-child. You know, he doesn't have much discrimination, a sense of discrimination. Do you know the Alcoholics Anonymous Serenity Prayer, Padmaja?
No, I don't actually. Sorry about that.
Okay, let me recite it for you. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, you know, Prabir and his ilk, they don't know the difference. This is their problem. They also don't know the difference between who's playing them and who's not. The problem wasn't the stories which were quoted about, you know, creating negative contrast between India and then America, China, or whatever. The real problem was the other stories that NewsClick ran, which directly impacted Chinese security interests. The first was repeated stories by a journalist called Ravi Nair on the Rafale. Factually incorrect. Every single one of them had factual inaccuracies, which passed their so-called editorial standard and went on getting promoted. Many people in the Congress retweeted this and used his articles. And remember, other than Japan and Korea, the Rafale is the biggest threat to China that you see. So there was very clearly NewsClick taking on an operation which helped the Chinese security environment. The second was Chinese business interests, mining interests specifically in Australia. The second big thing that NewsClick took on was Adani Mines in Australia. Right. And Adani was the only other guy. Remember, Australia has a duopoly. One is Rio Tinto and the other is Chinese mining corporations. The only person breaking that monopoly was Adani, who specializes in these greenfield projects. And they were the only one, Adani was the only one chosen for this kind of targeted hit jobs by NewsClick and its journalists. Why is that? Why do you think that is? Now, I don't think Prabir Purkasta or Ravi Nair had the brains to understand what they were doing. You remember the last part, God, please give me the serenity to know the difference. They did not know that. I think, this is what in communist lingo is called a useful idiot. It's a technical term. It's not a swear word or anything. It's a technical term used in a lot of communist literature to find somebody who's gullible enough, naive enough, stupid enough to be manipulated. But what is more dangerous is that political parties which really should have known better should have avoided this like the plague. They did not. There are many more instances. Now, is Chinese investment per se wrong? No. Remember, China and America are the two biggest competitors on earth, but they are completely interdependent. China was created by American investment, and America today thrives on Chinese production. That is not what a negative investment is. Here, there is investment directly coming from the Chinese government to certain political parties or indirectly to certain business houses. Incidentally, Mr. Omidyar is his venture capital is a very big recipient of Chinese funding, and he invests very heavily in the Indian media. Why is that? Why is it that so much of this Chinese venture capital, angel investor funding by proxy ends up going to propaganda arms and news agencies and things like that? I really wonder why. Don't you find it really strange? I mean, I'm not quoting the New York Times at all. Please don't ask me to quote the New York Times. I don't touch it with a barge pole. I'm just saying there are too many coincidences here that just add up of people towing the Communist Party line or interests that suit China to become to be a coincidence anymore.
Okay,
See,
let's ask Professor Mandal. He's a professor. He's an avid reader and watcher of many newspapers and many online portals. What do you think explains this coincidence? NewsClick is now not hardly a coincidence. It's a very clear intent and the funding is quite clear. Abhijit Ayar Mitra says the pattern is applicable to many more. Professor Mandal.
It could be, but unfortunately, Padmaja, I'm not really in the business of trusting these news portals. I'm more into the mainstream news. I understand the quality of news these days is deplorably low. Nonetheless, I don't understand why are we giving so much importance to this particular agency. They've been there for the last, how many years? I mean, 12, 13 years, I think, in this business. I mean, how are we affected by them?
How are we affected?
They're stealing money.
Because here is somebody, sir, who actively sabotages Indian interest. They actively sabotage Indian interest.
So by sabotaging Indian interest, did they allow Manipur to burn? Who is burning Manipur?
Professor Mandal, I could actually go into how there's a very strong China link there as well, but let's not go off on that tangent, please. There is actually a very strong China link there, but I don't want to be derailed by what you're trying to do. I'm asking you a simple question, sir. I'm asking you a simple question. Again,
China link is Manipur as well? So if there is China link in Manipur, then the country's foreign policy must be radically questioned.
Okay. Now, since you mentioned the Northeast, not Manipur, let me quote to you another example. And I think it's very important for our viewers to watch this. Because every time you give one example, you say, oh, look, China's role in COVID was being whitewashed. They're like, oh, but what about Manipur? Is a China link over there as well? The answer to that is yes. But let me start right now with Arunachal. Do you know that there was another email that was sent? And it was sent on the 6th of January 2021, sir. This email on the 6th of January 2021 again came from Mr. Singham to Prabir Purkayas. You know what this email says? It has a map of Arunachal and the border we share with China. It says, on the HD map, we had changed Taiwan and Hong Kong colors, caps reduction of Taipei to be provincial capital, not country. I think we missed the dotted line between India and China to the left, east of Bhutan. Clearly, China and India will have to have two maps inside their countries. And then Mr. Purkayas puts this map and says, here is the map from Diplomat where China claims Arunachal Pradesh. So, an independent news organization got an email from their independent funder who just happens to be sitting in Shanghai and sharing office space with people who are doing propaganda for the CCPA. And he says, hey, look, why don't you put a dotted line on a map of Arunachal? Do you think, Mr. Mandal, that this also is independent journalism? Where you are actually bringing India's borders into question. You are running down India's handling of COVID, trying to pump up China. You are putting India's borders into question. You are putting India's sovereignty into question. Is this the independent journalism that was being defended in 2021?
No. I would like to question your kind of journalism as well. But I am not. I'm not questioning.
No, you are welcome to. Let me tell you, sir, anytime you question our journalism, I sure as hell don't take one paisa from anyone to talk and write rubbish. I at least come with my material and I come with my facts and I come with emails that we have. I don't take China's money. Not one paisa do I take from China or anyone.
I did not say. But you have,
don't worry about my journalism, sir.
Oh my God. And this is your journalism.
Also, let me remind you that a bunch of people who, when they were arrested by Team India governments, you and people like you were cheering and saying, oh, Godi media has been taught a lesson. What a great day for democracy. And when people who are on China's payroll are being exposed or they are being searched, then you say, what a dark day for democracy.
Journalism. You know why? Because you call us to speak and you do not allow us to even complete a single sentence. I am not going to question. I pity your kind of journalism.
I don't need your pity, sir.
Please listen to
I pity that you have to whitewash Chinese agents. I pity it. I pity that.
You do not need to. It is the failure. If this person is a Chinese agent and this news portal is doing business on the for Chinese people, then it's a failure of the government of India, and I pity them along with you.
Okay.
They could not.
Let Sanju Verma answer for the second part of your pity.
There are so many.
Thank you.
Kinds of
Padmaja, I need my time.
Okay, answer this. If 38 crores have indeed flown into the coffers of NewsClick, that's your problem, Sanju Verma, and it's your failure.
Now let me be very clear. Padmaja, first and foremost, let's not forget, as Abhijit Iyer Mitra very rightly said, that Adani has been the focus of every narrative in the last 6 to 9 months. And I want to tell you that what was the one thing that the Congress cabal kept saying? Adani is functioning through a whole network of shell companies. Forget about the price rigging and price manipulation charges. The SEBI is looking into it. If Adani working through shell companies is something that is not kosher, how is it that Neville Roy Singham and NewsClick, who I'm told work through a network of more than 114 shell companies, how is that kosher? Will the Congress question the intricate links between Prabir Purkayas, NewsClick and the 114 shell companies which are at work? Point number 2, and I have to rebut this because somebody on your panel said that under the Modi government, the trade deficit with China has burgeoned to $100 billion. I will just spend 10 seconds on it. When Atal Bihari Vajpayee relinquished the top job in 2004, our trade deficit with China was it had gone to something like $1.4 billion. And when we took over from the Congress in 2014, it was $38 billion. So from 2004 to 2014, the trade deficit under Congress went up by 2,600%.
Okay.
From 2014 to now, the trade deficit is up only 92% at $73 billion. So don't make odious comparisons, but very quickly in 20 seconds. Why is it that when the BBC comes out with a trashy report questioning even the bona fides of India's judiciary, everybody from Rahul Gandhi to Priyanka Vadra says, "Sab changa si about BBC report." When Hindenburg comes out with a trashy report undermining India's entrepreneurial ecosystem, everybody says, "Oh, Hindenburg is the next thing to Raja Harishchandra," but you are the same lot which will not even speak about Morgan Stanley raising India's outlook from underweight to equal weight and then overweight.
Okay, Roahan Mitra, I have a more specific question. It's not alone the case of NewsClick or the BBC. If you remember, there was a gentleman called Vivek Raghuvanshi. Vivek Raghuvanshi was actually arrested. Mr. Mitra, I'm asking you a question. I hope you can hear me.
Find out. We are not here to defend the Mr. Shashi Tharoor started your show. You showed what Mr. Shashi Tharoor said. And Mr. Shashi Tharoor was very clear on what he said. That
no, but there is no clarity because I'll tell you how there is a pattern. This is not the solitary example. Mr. Mitra, listen to my examples. There is already the case of the BBC, which ultimately itself admitted that there were tax evasion. There is the case of NewsClick, which has now been shown to be funded by a Chinese front. And there was the case of Vivek Raghuvanshi, who was arrested by Indian authorities and booked under the Official Secret Act for selling Indian secrets to China. When he was asked about Vivek Raghuvanshi on his US visit, Mr. Gandhi said that this shows how free speech is being muzzled in India. Are you seriously saying that you are not shielding people or you are not giving cover fire to people who are working on the instructions of China? NewsClick is just an example. There is Vivek Raghuvanshi as well.
We were on the show. None of the panel who was speaking in favor of the INDA alliance. I did not hear a single of them, any of us, defend this whole, this money trail. We are not here to defend the money trail. We are talking about the ED specifically. You started this conversation saying that the ED is above all, it's holier than
Nobody
everything.
said that. Nobody said that.
The ED was the one which went after Ajit Pawar. The ED, one second, let me answer you. The ED is the one which went after Ajit Pawar. The ED is the one which went after Praful Patel. ED is which has gone for Mukul Roy. But what happened to them?
Again, sir, you are goose-stepping around my question. I gave you specific examples. NewsClick, BBC, Vivek Raghuvanshi. And Vivek Raghuvanshi, by the way, was arrested by CBI for leaking secrets from DRDO. I'll give the final word to Abhijit Ayar Mitra because he actually also covers defense. Abhijit Ayar Mitra, very often, maybe there is the odd NewsClick, maybe there is the odd Vivek Raghuvanshi, there is the odd BBC. But then there are people who think that this has just become a carte blanche for the government to demonize anyone who speaks up and bring up that mystical foreign hand. Anyone who speaks up is said Chinese agent, American agent, CIA agent.
Thank you, Padmaja. See, the problem here is that everyone who gets raided gets defended as some great, defender of free speech. And then when the actual facts come out, it's actually wider than the examples of Vivek Raghuvanshi. You look at this alleged journalist, Miss Ayub. She has actually committed tax fraud. I mean, it's clear as night and day. You can't keep that kind of money in your account and not pay taxes on it if you've collected it for charity purposes. There was a think tank that got raided, and that is a very clear-cut case. There was another publication that got raided, which got money from the Omidyar Network, #1, who has very significant business interests in China. And also, there was a transaction in their ledger from Mauritius, which then disappeared from their transaction list. So you see, every place. My problem here is the coincidences, Padmaja. Every place where there is wrongdoing, these people step up to defend it as an attack on freedom of speech. And all the persons who are defending the so-called freedom of speech are parroting a line which is uncomfortably close to what the Chinese Communist Party once said. I do not believe in the ED. ED has a less than 1% conviction rate. I do not believe in New York Times. I won't quote New York Times to my worst enemy. I might actually give the New York Times edition to my worst enemy. But other than that, Other than that, the coincidences here are far too great. There is a complete nexus here of way too many coincidences happening with Chinese talking points.
Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, Abhijit, because